Okay, a couple minutes on Deleuze and his relationship to Adorno. So, um, Deleuze says that every philosopher is really in conversation with other philosophers, and they never really mention this. They never say their names, but you have to do a kind of exegesis to have mine out and find what's going on in the consciousness of the philosopher that is not just being written. So you're, of course, trying to get inside their mind. It's the exegesis, and it's kind of it's the philosophical method of Deleuze. Um, Comparatively, you have with Strauss, you have the esotericist method, where you're trying to find the esoteric hidden underlying meaning, what's being implied but not said. And in this relationship, there is something similarity between Leo Strauss and Deleuze. In a sense, you could see Deleuze as anti-Straussian, because one is trying to, in a sense, uphold civic virtue, and one is trying to erode it. And Deleuze does offer an interpretation of insurrectionary anarchism that is almost directly opposed to Strauss. It's like, the noble lie, the tale of the noble lie. It could be perceived in a Straussian sense of, we must tell the guardians they're made of gold. Lies to preserve the function of the state and of power, because that's what's necessary for the republic. In another sense, you could say, well, Plato's telling us the truth. Like, art has the power to captivate people to revolt, and that's why poets must be suppressed. And there is a truth that all forms of rule are founded on lies. So you can have a kind of anarchist interpretation of Plato, but I mean, Plato was no anarchist. It's just you can use things to your ends, not necessarily interpret. It's a mechanistic relation. But beyond this, like Adorno focuses on rackets. So thinks that all relationships under late capitalism are eventually converted into rackets. That unions become rackets, businesses become rackets. There's so much there's so much that's taken in by businesses from the state that many do operate as rackets, that you can easily call Tesla a racket. What kind of functions through the conveyance of a reduction in carbon outputs. It's not real. It's really just a game of numbers on a spreadsheet. But Deleuze instead talks about the apparatus of capture. So the state is like a racket. It imposes itself in relationships, and it calls this overcoding. You impose yourself in a relationship and create a necessity for yourself. So there, that's taxation, profit, and possibly something that can come on another relation. There's the inducement to surplus. So the capitalist makes you produce surplus value in the same instance as value is produced. And the system always has this kind of a capture. But rackets in an apparatus of capture functionally are going to look the same. It's really the same concept in different wording. And Adorno has this concept of the authoritarian personality. He thought you could come up with a test to determine how authoritarian someone was, which in itself is kind of an authoritarian concept, right? Because that Christopher Lasch kind of talks about the problem of like modernity and what produces this narcissism is that we just take so many measurements, data, analytics, and for Deleuze, like counting everything and like comparing everything to a norm and recording everything has to do with like a society of well, have like a society of discipline, or it's like, well, basically like since the Napoleonic approach to society, the state has started to function in a way of taking as much information about people as possible and to use that to exert power over them. And it almost seems like Adorno is kind of playing into that. He's like, well, we can determine who's authoritarian. We just need more data. But like Deleuze is like, well, no, like how can Adorno tell us about the authoritarian personality when he's a dialectician? And what dialectics is an authoritarian structure of the intuition. And they call the therapy for borderline personality disorder dialectical behavioral thinking. And it is kind of trying to be based on this dialectic concept, but it's like dialectics thinks itself revolutionary because it's like, it's the reconciliation of opposites. It's not an embrace of an opposite, but it's like, well, why not? Why even look at things in a binary, right? It's just, and dialectics never conceives of itself as a binary, but it's the most advanced understanding of a relationship between two things. And like Deleuze is saying, like, if you're a dialectician, you're already an authoritarian. And, instead of saying like, well, Marx was into Hegel, so that made him an authoritarian, we can go backwards and say, well, what was the structure of Marx's intuition? Why did he find such affinity for Hegel? And that was due to Marx's own authoritarian personality. And I think like with Deleuze, we can put Bakunin's ideas of Marx being an authoritarian on like a concrete foundation. And that's like Deleuze's relationship to the Enlightenment is like, Bergson, intuition, actually the way thought is structured is we are always intuiting and going into further processes and mixing up information so as to see patterns in such a way that you can't really do away with it or conceive of something without intuition, and to try to found philosophy that's just based on reason, that disregards any conclusion from intuition, is going to be lacking in what it can do in its kind of power and utility, or power and capacity. So instead of like Descartes, Descartes wants to start on the basis of what can I know for certain, and Deleuze is more on the basis of what could I absolutely possibly know if I include all forms of knowing, and starting from there and going backwards, eliminative instead of additive approach to understanding, because then there's more of a focus on caution, as opposed to like I'm ruthlessly critique all that exists and keep going. I don't know if there's really like a caution in that like enlightenment fervor to destroy the foundations of all thought. Not that Deleuze isn't, but he's bringing in intuition, which is going to make a different relationship between everything. That we're not going just with what's proved, but we're dealing with concepts that are constructed and created. That if if the basis of production is material production, the basis of philosophy is conceptual production. You're clocking in at the concept factory. And so that's the thing about the dialectic of enlightenment. Like that's one way that Adorno kind of conceives of like reason kind of producing the worst products of itself. But they have different relationships to the Enlightenment since, Adorno is a Hegelian through and through. And, what Adorno always sees as a barbarism is somewhat similar to Deleuze, but like Deleuze is, like his relationship to barbarism is like, okay, let's go into the nomad. What is cruelty? What does cruelty mean for nomads? What does it mean for those in the state? Can we really say who is more cruel? No, I think he kind of takes up this question of like barbarism. What is barbarism? How barbaric are we? Well, also having more of a in-depth philosophical basis for it. Um, and there's there's alternative aesthetic theories. Adorno is much harder for me to wrap my head around. With aesthetics, sometimes it's about the impossibility of art, or it might be taking on some Kantian understanding. But Deleuze is much more, disregard representation, no interpretation, against interpretation. It's all surface impression, but it's like, surfaces have textures. They're not flat, there's more to them. If we really analyze what's on the surface, we can realize that you can stay on the surface of something and still have a depth. Now, they both are addressing the Holocaust and Nazis and what happened with mass politics. And, Adorno is dialectic of enlightenment. As the culmination of the Enlightenment happens at Auschwitz. And, Deleuze is focused on understanding the desire. He's like, the Nazis came to power in Germany. And that was an awakening of mass desire. That, in a sense, you have to think, why did people want their own subjection? And it's not that everyone wanted it. But enough did, and there was enough of that free-floating desire to make it happen. And when you awaken a society to their own desires, it's going to depend a lot on what society that is as to what the outcome will be. That's all.